Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Brown Bag virtual public input session. Today we're going to have kind of an overview and reminder of the public visioning session that occurred last fall in October of 2019. You'll hear from Dr. Pat Crawford about some of the concepts and reuse designs that were taken from that meeting. We'll also get an update from Brandon with DEQ on some of the site work that's been happening. But before we dive in, real quick, I just wanted to cover a few logistics for today's meeting. If anybody is experiencing connection issues, feel free to send me an email or give me a call on my mobile number or send me a text message, 785-230-6825, or you can send me an email at maggiejesse@ksu.edu. We do ask that all participants remain muted during the presentations just to avoid some background clutter. If you do have a question for a presenter, or anything you hear, you can put that question into the chat box and we will get those questions answered for you. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to a website later this week along with the presentation slides. So this information will be available for later viewing and sharing as needed. Just real quick, for those that may not be familiar with Zoom, this slide just kind of shows you how to mute yourself. If you had to dial in by phone, it's really good to turn your computer audio off just to avoid any feedback on your end. So you can do that using these instructions. This slide also shows you where the chat button is located. You can click on that and that will bring up the chat box for you to type in your questions. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Lillian Sunwell with Great Falls Economic Development. She's one of the local leaders that has been spearheading this project for the community. Lillian.
Thank you, Maggie. I appreciate it. Today, I'm going to let you see who has been working with GFDA and EPA and DEQ on this project. And I'd like to introduce some of them. Brandon Kingsbury and Jason Seiler from Montana Department of Environmental Quality, and Jennifer Clancy and Maggie Egberts from KSU TAB, who has put this whole program together. Pat Crawford with South Dakota State University School of Design. She's a landscape architect who has been putting a lot of these designs and concepts together. Ashley Badesh, she's with Sustainable Strategies, and she is also a KSU TAB partner. And then, of course, our community stakeholders, Jane Weber, Cascade County Commissioner, Steve Grooms, the President and CEO of First Liberty Federal Credit Union, Teresa Andrews, she is the property owner of the Miracle Mile site, and Jim Winiger of Montana Department of Transportation. Thank you all for the role you have played in this. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Kingsbury. Oh, and here's today's agenda, excuse me. Brandon's going to show us how we got here and a little bit about the site cleanup. Jennifer Clancy's going to talk about the overview of public revisioning process. And then Pat's going to get into the actual visioning outcomes and reuse potential. Ashley will give us the resources and partners that are available to help move things forward. And then at the end, we'll have questions and answers, and throughout poll questions, and then a wrap up by Maggie. Go ahead, Brandon. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian. So I'd like to start by just talking about what Brownfields is. Brownfields is a program through the Environmental Protection Agency to address contaminated sites, whether they're petroleum or hazardous substance such as asbestos or lead-based paint. In this case, this site had all three contaminants, and I'll get to that in a minute where brownfields came in. But the history of this site was one of mostly petroleum dispensing, which started in 1956 and went all the way up till the early 90s. When they were removing the tanks and the piping, they found a petroleum release there, and they were investigating the release through the 90s. But in 2003, like many of these petroleum sites, they stall out just because of a lack of funding, and they can get quite expensive for small businesses or family-owned businesses. So it stalled out until 2017 when I worked with GFDA and EPA to get the site eligible for petroleum brownfields funding. With that funding in place, I was actually able to do a grant-led targeted brownfields assessment using DEQ funds to meet the PTRCB copay. The PTRCB, if anybody knows it, it's the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Board. And this board provides funding for petroleum releases that are eligible for up to $1 million. The copay is $17,500, and up until 2017, that copay hadn't been met. So we used Brownfields grant funding to meet that copay, and then we were able to move to a cleanup scope. In 2018, we were able to get excavation of petroleum impacted soils approved for the Petro Fund. And we were also able to leverage Lillian's revolving loan fund to address both the hazardous substance, which would be ineligible for the Petro Fund, and then also provide a backing to get the site moving forward with petroleum cleanup. So there was some reimbursement of that loan through the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Board, which did not have to come out of the owner's pocket. 2020, here we are. Excavation has just stopped, and the site is back to kind of a blank slate. So I will get into that now. So this is a picture of the excavation in progress on the left. Teresa Andrews, she's the owner. She's standing out front. Up in the top left, you can kind of see how it looked before anything happened. And if we want to move to the video, we can. This is demolition as it's progressing, as it happened just a couple months ago. The demolition was kind of unique from a funding perspective in that we were able to get remediation funds from the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Board to pay for the demolition of the site. And the way we were able to do that is by saying that the site was underlain by a lot of petroleum contamination, and it would be much more cost effective to access that soil if we could demolish the building. So the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Board, they agreed with that. And we were also able to get some of that demolition backed by the revolving loan fund and move pretty quickly on the site. And so after the site was completely raised, we were then able to move into excavation. Could you go to the next video? And so here's the excavation happening. As you can see in the back, there's dump trucks there. Those are 20 cubic yard dump trucks, and I'm sure at least a couple hundred of those trucks were filled through the process of this excavation. The total excavation amount was around 4,500 cubic yards, and the contaminated soil amount was around 2,000 cubic yards. The excavation took place over a couple weeks, and by the time it was complete, the site looked completely different. And I don't know if we have any after pictures, but it is a complete blank slate. It's ready to go, ready for redevelopment. So what was sitting there for 40 years, contamination, is now finally gone, and the excavation that we're doing is going to definitely speed us up towards cleanup. It will reduce the amount of time that we need to monitor the groundwater there, and eventually all the contaminants will drop below DEQ's action levels, and then we will be able to issue a no further corrective action letter, which pretty much gives you a letter that says you're clean and you're ready to go. So now I will pass this on to Jennifer Clancy.
Hi, thanks, Brandon. So the Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields Program, or KSU TAB, as you'll hear us refer to it, provides free technical assistance to communities and stakeholders related to brownfields redevelopment efforts. And this assistance includes planning activities, environmental assistance, and economic development planning assistance. So we do this in a variety of ways, depending on the needs of the community. And based on discussions with Lillian and others that she collaborates with, it became apparent that a visioning project for both the 2nd Avenue North Corridor and the Miracle Mile site could be very beneficial for Great Falls. Next, please. So KSU TAB, in partnership with Great Falls Economic Development and Montana DEQ, facilitated a community visioning workshop on Thursday, October 10th, 2019, with the goal of taking community input about revitalization ideas for the Miracle Mile site and for the 2nd Avenue North Corridor streetscape. And both of these as a path that leads to the main gate of the Maelstrom Air Force Base. So the visioning process involved small group table discussions where the groups were asked to think about ideas and priorities for the area. So specifically, what development on the Miracle Mile site and the corridor would most satisfy economic, community, and environmental needs, and what non-commercial considerations are important. What streetscape amenities and improvements would you like to see? And consider things like green space, public area, public transportation, walking, biking, or other amenities, and what development would not be acceptable. So following that group discussion, each group reported on their top 5 priorities, and then individuals voted on their favorite ideas. So those ideas are what Dr. Pat Crawford considered for her recommendations and what she is going to be presenting to us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat now.
Hello. So the first thing I want to do is go through a short summary of things we learned with community input. We'll start off with the site assets, and there really was a strong sense of the location being on the good roads, the nice wide ROWs, the really good city infrastructure that makes it possible to develop this site in multiple ways. Proximity to the other amenities for the community and the Air Force Base was considered a positive. Some of the things that were considered potential site threats or things that would need to be managed will overlap a bit. Some of it is the amount of traffic on the road, especially as the Air Force Base has changing shifts, people going in and out, and the road speeds. The site overall, when we look at the larger context, is somewhat flat. So it does create some interesting drainage, things that need to be thought through. Some of the industrial development that is around the site may impact the types of things this area is used for. Some of the weaknesses when it comes to, say, the larger community were missing of a non-motorized trail system, either walking, biking, that kind of thing. This will change in a bit. No indoor swimming pool on the base or town at the time of the meeting. Underutilized properties in the area, and somewhat that it is at the edge of town. So next slide. So with that, and some of the community gave specific ideas, and with the graphic on the right, the orange or the smaller square is the Miracle Mile specific piece of property. When we work in visioning, we do tend to try to think a little broader, outside the bounds. We try to think of ideas that could be applied at many sites, even though this site is what brought the discussion and the people to the table. So in the ideas I'm going to share, several of them do look at the larger undeveloped area next to the Miracle Mile. And please keep in mind that there are many sites along the 2nd Avenue or elsewhere in the community that these ideas could be used for. So with the participants and the votes, retail was the most popular item with the group of people who were there. It got 42 stars. There was discussion about potentially moving the Air Force Museum outside of the gate in the spirit of making it accessible to more people. There were some votes towards the ideas of recreation. At that time, some ideas people threw out were a pool, putt-putt, go-karts, anything in the related amenities, businesses, green space, landscaping. And I do at this point want to update, and I want to bring Lillian in if she's available. Lillian, can you update on the pool?
Yes. So it was announced that the city of Great Falls received a $10 million grant to go towards a pool. And also I heard from a member of the school board that there is a land swap going on to make the Great Falls Public Schools had a piece of property that they can swap to use this. And the reason they needed to do this is so they could get the grant. And if the Electric announced today, that's the online newspaper, that the city of Great Falls was awarded a $10 million grant from the Department of Defense for a $20 million indoor aquatics facility. And so this is exciting news. It's one of the things that was discussed at our October 2019 meeting as a potential. And so we're pretty excited to hear about this aquatics project and see it moving forward.
Thank you, Lillian, and congratulations to the community. That's very exciting. Next slide. One of the things I did want to do was to acknowledge and be respectful of community visioning work that has gone on in the past. And in 2011, there was a very significant visioning work done along 2nd Avenue, really focused on streetscape enhancements. Next slide. A lot of that work and that discussion was around the notion of turn lanes, medians, road width, right-of-ways on the side, plantings, screenings, those kinds of activities. And there were several options presented and discussed with the community. Next slide. So this was some of the examples on the ideas of using screening and planting to help make 2nd Avenue feel more human scale. Next slide. When I was on site, I was able to identify quickly some of the things that the community has already implemented with that previous visioning. So the presence of the bike lane, the turn lane through the center of the road. There is quite a collection of thematic fencing and plantings that have been installed. The plantings, of course, will need some time to reach maturity and get their full effect. Next slide. So now we do want to make this a participatory meeting. We have a poll question for you. And the question is, which type of the reuse ideas presented would you support for this site? So a pop-up will show up. You will have to scroll down to answer each of the questions. When you're done, please hit submit, or the questionnaire won't go away until you hit submit. So Maggie, Are you going to run that for us? Okay, and I'm going to let Maggie and Jen kind of report back on what they see as the quick responses.
It looks like multi-use or single-use retail
Okay.
are getting the most supportive votes.
Okay. All right. So Maggie, do we want to end the poll at this point? Oh, there we go. There's our summary. All right. Am I ready to move on, Maggie?
Yes.
Okay. If the poll doesn't go away, you have to hit the X in the upper corner. So with that input from the community, then I started thinking about what are the ideas I can share that will help people think through the next phase of what it is you guys might like to do. I did go to the Great Falls, Montana website and was actually very inspired by the wealth of cultural, artistic, and natural activities and events and things that the community values. So I tried to carry some of those values into the ideas that I'm going to share with you for the 2nd Avenue and Miracle Mile site. Next slide. One of the things that came out was, is there something you can do with the bike lanes? We worked with the Montana Department of Transportation and talked with them. They do have some standard colors and symbols, because when I showed you the photo of the bike lane at the Miracle Mile site, you kind of had to know what you were looking for to realize that was the bike lane. So if you could add some pavement graphics, that could help make it stand out better. Now, I do want to share some ideas with you. So next slide. In other communities, people have gotten a little creative with the colors. You can see on the right-hand side, it's your traditional green. It uses the standard bicycle symbol. So it's within some of the stuff where the Montana group likes to start. On the left-hand side, you can see they went with a rainbow. Next slide. This is another project where you can get a little creative with what the bicycle symbol looks like. Next slide. This idea is it engaged the local elementary school. In the middle, you can see the young child's idea, their suggestion for what a graphic could look like. On the right-hand side, you see where they worked with a graphic designer or an artist to translate the child's vision into a good graphic to put on the bike lane. So sometimes if organizations are willing, this is a great way to do some community engagement. It's really fairly easy once you get through the permissions process. Next slide. Another idea to throw out for you is 2nd Avenue it's nice and wide, and you do have the big right-of-ways. So that made me think about, is there potential for artwork along the right-of-way and within the different sites? So the one at the bottom, it might show the artwork is in the median. I'm not suggesting to go back and put medians back in or anything like that, but the artwork gives you ideas of things you could think about. With the 2nd Avenue site, it does need to be scale appropriate to the roadway so that people have that artistic experience. Next slide. This was an idea that I found. It was called Life Without Tree Installation. And I thought it was an example of a fairly simple construction that could be implemented along the entire corridor. You could do one big idea across a big chunk of the corridor or the whole thing. So some of these are really just to get your creative juices flowing. Next slide. The next question for our poll is, do you support any type of streetscape improvements? Do you like bike lane improvements? Do you like incorporating art? And again, they will be separate questions. So I'll turn this back to Maggie. Thank you.
Okay, this is exciting. We have an overwhelming majority of yes to supporting streetscapes, yes to supporting bike lanes improvement, and yes for art installations. And yes, I would encourage participants to write answers in the chat box for what type of art interests you, or if you do have some ideas for streetscape or bike lane improvements.
Okay, so I think this is actually a very big takeaway for the community, that those are two things that might be very doable things that you could start conversations with various folks on. Okay, let's see. So do I have to hit X2? Yep, I have to hit X2. Okay. With the idea of work along the 2nd Avenue, one of the things I did notice is that there are some really nice various museums and other cultural type places within the community. And it would be possible to create a trail, whether it was a biking trail or a driving trail, and connect these various cultural or artistic museums so that a visitor or somebody could bring their guests in town along the activity. So you see the little orange dots along the yellow dash line, that's 2nd Avenue. So part of the idea with artworks there is that would be spaced accordingly along the streetscape. With this idea taps into the proposal of moving the Air Force Museum out to the 2nd Mile or Miracle Mile site, and then it could be an integrated part of a pathway system. And I do want to be careful. These are thoughts or ideas. Of course, the property is always privately owned, and lots of things to navigate with the ownership there. Next slide. When I looked at the Air Force Base, the yellow box is the size of the larger site that I looked at. So it's the Miracle Mile site plus the currently undeveloped property. And from that quick look, it seemed like it could be feasible to have a nice small museum, some parking, and get a lot of the artifacts, the planes, displayed on site if people wanted to pursue that. Next slide. So now I'm going to go into the ideas of site retail. I went out and I found some examples of some other developed sites that had, and I start with multi-storefront retail type development. On the left, the black box, again, is the full site. On the right-hand side is if somebody was only wanted to develop the Miracle Mile property, you see you still have some potential of getting some retail in there. I'll share on this slide, though, that when you're able to capture the larger site, you gain efficiencies in your utilities and your road circulation and things like that. So that's something to think about. However the sites are developed, is if there's any common ground for roads and things like that. Access for the utility, the trash trucks. Next slide. Here's another example of use of potential sites And one of the things that I've always found fascinating is the amount of ground space you need for vehicle driving and parking. It's often surprising how much land space you need to achieve those goals. And I do want to note that because the right-of-ways are nice and large in this area, that is taking some space out of the potential parking driveway access. So you do want to just keep that in mind as people explore ideas. Next slide. With the idea of retail, I wanted to throw out some things to think about or ideas to converse with a potential developer. One of the conversations lines could be around the facade or that storefront proportion. And it's really a question of what is right for the community, what is right for that particular retail that's going in, what's that feel that you're after. There's single story. On the left is an example of a single story type scheme. On the right-hand side, sorry if I said that backwards, on the right is you can get into some two-story stuff. It still feels nice and residential scale. Next slide. With some site development, this may seem like out of the blue, but to think about the use of overhead features, whether it's creating an archway, a gateway, and also what the shadows do of when we're working in the overhead plane. In the upper row middle picture, it used shadow to create text out of a famous book. So those are just ideas to get you thinking about retail can be very aesthetically pleasing. It can be fun to go to. Next slide. Along that same lines, with the retail, there's many landscape and site development features that could be a match for the kind of retail that's being installed. So I would think about, are there places people can sit? Can they rest there for a little while? So it's about the outdoor facilities and amenities as much as the indoor of what the retail or the commercial provides. Next. When thinking about character with the notion of retail, I've got 3 or 4 different examples just to get some ideas going. So this is kind of a standard retail development, especially out west in the Arizona area. I saw a lot of retail development that had this feel to it. Next slide. Here's another sense of character, which becomes more modular. You can also see how the color choices and the material choices for the facades can impact how that retail area feels to the community. Next. This slide has 2 different approaches. Up on the top is more of industrial modern. So you show the framework using the metals instead of stone or wood. On the bottom is a very different approach of going to recreating the old downtown character and feel. So I'm not advocating for any one of these. I'm just opening up that it's a fun discussion to have if you decide to go retail on this site or any other site. Next slide. One last idea for if the site goes retail. Again, the black box is the full site. The previous examples were all a collection of individual retail within a framework of a building. This is one building that could house multiple uses or activities. There are some advantages. There's also disadvantages to thinking of the structure as one big building and then the uses that are inside of it. Next slide. This also changes the look and feel of the structure on site. So in this case, you do have that bigger building feel. You could have 2, potentially 3 stories, depending upon what is appropriate for the community or what the needs are. You can have business retail on the bottom. You can have housing up above. You can have your retail on the bottom. You can have services on the floors above. And then again, a lot of styles that you can go with, whether it's the brick, a more modern colored concrete, or those types of things. Next slide. With the public meeting, there was a lot of ideas on what retail is, and I think there's even more ideas about what it could be. So we would like to get your input on a different selection of types of retail. And in the survey, you're going to see sport and fitness, health, beauty and grooming, technology, grocery store, drugstore, cafe, restaurant, convenience, coffee, and then other services, your e-commerce, printing, and like that. So we would appreciate your feedback on what types of retail do you think would be well suited for the location or the community. People are thinking on this one.
And one thing I would like to know, all these poll questions, as well as a few additional questions, will be available after today's webinar using a Qualtrics web link that I've created. So if you want a little bit more time to think about these reuses, that's perfectly fine. You will still have an opportunity to provide your input.
I'm going to be interested to see your summary on this one, Maggie. I'm trying to scroll through.
Yeah, it looks pretty even so far.
I think you got most of the guess.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Can you show us the summary? There, here we go. Sports, fitness was in a middle range. Health and beauty, diverse answers. Same for tech. Convenience, coffee, retail. That one went down there. That surprised me based off of feedback from the meeting to here. And that's why it's always good to collect multiple inputs. All righty, next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, I believe. Thanks, Ashley.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Badish. I'm with Sustainable Strategies DC, and we're a partner of KSU TAB that works on figuring out how to leverage federal, state, and other resources and incentives to make these types of projects and visions work and to fund them. So I wanted to just present a few of the potential funding resources that could be used to support some of the visions that we've talked about, as I know that that's always a concern of the public as well in terms of how you see these visions fitting into your community. So some of the resources are already at work, and also we discussed the exciting news about the Department of Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Grant. So that's a great example of federal grant funding that can be leveraged into a project like this. We also have the KSU TAB assistance that is already at work, as well as Montana DEQ Hazardous Substances Brownfield Program grants and US EPA Brownfield Assessment Cleanup and Revolving Loan Fund grants. There's also a number of resources available for economic development, including site preparation and utilities and those types of things that can help with the vertical development of a site. Those include the Montana Office of Tourism and Business Development Big Sky Economic Development Trust Fund grants, as well as U.S. Economic Development Administration Public Works grants that will support projects that create jobs in the community. We had a lot of discussion today about streetscape and access enhancements. the Montana Department of Transportation Transportation Alternatives Program and the State Parks Recreational Trails Program can help with the complete streets or bike lanes or pedestrian enhancements that we talked about. There are also federal and state resources available for public arts, including the National Endowment for the Arts grants for arts projects and Our Town grants, as well as the Montana Arts Council Cultural Trust grants. And then there are grants available for green space and parks improvements as well, which a state resource that is actually federal money that's administered through the state, the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Land and Water Conservation Fund grants. So these are just a sample of some of the grants that could be available to leverage in to make this vision a reality. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And with that, we have kind of one final poll question for you all. What other reuse ideas do you have for corridor improvements? There's already been lots of conversation going on in the chat, and so we just invite you to maybe continue that dialogue, write any other ideas that you may have into the Zoom chat box. And with that, that kind of concludes the formal presentation of our lunch webinar here. So now we're going to open it up to questions for any of our speakers, presenters. You can ask a question by typing it into the chat box, and then we can field that to the correct presenter. There's, kind of a small group of us here this afternoon, so if you would rather ask a question verbally, that would be fine. You can unmute yourself and do that. It looks like we did receive a question in the chat box. What is the next step in this process? Lillian, do you want to take that one?
Well, this is basically a visioning to give ideas of what's possible. So a lot of these properties are owned by private companies, private property owners, and I think that we need to maybe have a discussion moving forward, but at this point, this is just something to get people thinking about the potential for this area. And so it's kind of up to the community to decide, what they want to do next. But as far as this process, we wanted to give ideas as to what could happen in this area and to support the potential for what's going in on the site and also what could be possible on the corridor and to encourage people to start talking.
On the streetscape improvements, the next step would really be up to the city and county through the Metropolitan Planning Organization. I've been pushing to get the center median of 57th to be cemented similar to the faux brick cement that's along 57th in front of the soccer complex for many years, and transportation money is very limited, so that's been a low priority. But 57th from 10th Avenue South to 2nd Avenue North would look so much better if the center median was, I'd love to see it landscaped and everything, but that raises the maintenance costs. So the city and county could work together to really lead some streetscape improvements.
And on the remediation side, the next step is periodic monitoring of groundwater. Cleanup's been done now, so we're on to kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel there. So we don't want to get in the way of any sort of redevelopment.
Great. We received another question that I think this one could potentially go towards Teresa, if Teresa, you're still on and would like to answer. What is the plan for the site?
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So the plans for the site are to redevelop it with some sort of, I would love to do like a retail, although looking at some of the poll questions, some of the things like the services or things, just services and retail restaurants, things that aren't available immediately without going further into town. There's a dead space there between Great Falls and Malmstrom. And I just think that that whole end of town plus Malmstrom could really utilize a lot of those services right there. So like I said, a healthier fast food option, services, health and beauty, something along that line. So I'm excited to see some of those answers get some really good feedback from the polls. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for our presenters or property owner? Is the site connected to city services? So is there infrastructure in place there?
So I'll speak to that again. Right now we have city water. We do not have city sewer. I'm realizing that to get commercial out there, it would be better availability for more services if I could get the city sewer in. So I'm looking at just listening to Ashley's presentation, you know, maybe there's some resources there I can work on rather than trying to fund it personally. Bringing the water line either from a tie-in to Malmstrom, which is what I've been working on kind of behind the scenes, or actually connecting with the school over there, trying to find a main connection point to bring the city sewer out to that property line.
Excellent.
That could be a challenge. The city's been hesitant to extend more water and sewer connections unless the property is annexed into the city.
They did explain that it would need to be annexed in and that I didn't have to have neighbors. I mean, we've had dialogue on that. So it's just a matter of, they're like, we can do it for this amount of money. And I'm like, well, I personally can't take on that amount of money. So that's why I was reaching out to the base, like, okay, you've redeveloped your property and had to increase your sewer system. Can we tie into that? Or how can we do it? Can I bring other property owners in? You know, what are my options to increase the value for everybody's property? But the point is it also increases the tax on that property, so.
Yeah, a good example to look at is what we're trying to do with the Little Shell Tribe on Stookie Road right now. We had brought water and sewer out to Montana Eggs a number of years ago, kind of in the hope that if we brought it to one property, it would spur more redevelopment, and it hasn't yet, but now we're trying to put together a deal to extend it a bit further to the property that the Little Shell owned.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We had a question about the list for the retail preferences, and I can go back real quick on this slide. And as I mentioned, these poll questions, as well as a few additional poll questions, are going to be available through an online survey link. That you can access by accessing through this QR code, or by using this web link, you can provide some more public input. We also created a web page specific to this kind of reuse visioning discussion purposes, which is here. This website is where you will find this presentations from today. You will also find a recording later this week of today's webinar, and you will also then have access to this survey link to where you can continue to provide feedback. So here's just a list of all the presenters today, as well as our contact information. If you have any questions that you would like to follow up with or connect with somebody going forward, here is the information that you will need for that. And then here's just some, Jen kind of briefly touched on this, but again, this is just who TAB is, who we are, what we do, how we can help support communities, developers, revitalize and redevelop some of their, underutilized property. With that, if there are no more questions.
If I could just chime in real quick, Lillian may have done this at the beginning of the meeting, but we have a brand new assessment grant from EPA, which we're very excited about. and it is county-wide now. So just wanted to let everyone know that phase ones, phase twos to foster redevelopment throughout the county, have them contact Lillian, and we can start doing that. We just approved a phase one for downtown Great Falls this morning, which wipes out our last assessment grant. So it's great that we can keep the momentum going. Thank you, EPA. And the other is we have a ton of loan money that we can do low interest loans for environmental cleanup. The city issued a bond on the West Bank Landing project that paid us off a big chunk of what we had done there. So we are eager to put these funds to work. We've got some good projects going on right now. In addition to the Miracle Mile site, we just finished the asbestos removal at the C.M. Russell Museum. As we speak, the old historic Cascade County Jail, I think they finished the basement and the first floor, and they're working on abatement on the second floor. But if you know any good projects, let's keep the momentum going.
That's excellent. Thank you. Congratulations on all your EPA funding. That's great. Okay. Do any of our speakers or presenters have any final thoughts or words they would like to share with the group today? If not, then that will conclude our Brown Bag Lunch webinar. And thank you all for your time, and maybe we'll see you all again soon.